Alright, welcome back everyone, and today we're diving into chapter 5 on elasticity. Now in this chapter we're going to deviate a little bit in terms of the textbook and the order that the topics are presented, but the textbook chapter is still a great resource for you to read for elasticity. But up on the board here I've written a sort of outline of the topics that we're going to cover today in this video and the order in which we're going to cover them. So we're going to start with a little intro to elasticity and talk about what elasticity is. Okay, so in economics, this concept of elasticity is used to measure how sensitive or how responsive consumers and producers are to changes in market conditions. And the number one change in the market that we're interested in is a change in price. So in our supply and demand model, we discussed something called the law of demand, which told us that if we hold everything else constant, if we have an increase in the price of a good, the quantity of that good that will be demanded is going to decrease. So we already know this is true. On the other hand, we know that the law of supply tells us that if the price of a good increases, the quantity supplied is going to increase. But now the question that we want to ask and that we want to answer with this concept of elasticity is, by how much does quantity demanded decrease when the price rises by, say, 50%. Now we want to measure how strong this relationship is between price and quantity demanded, or between price and quantity supplied. We want to see how sensitive are consumers to changes in price. Okay, now we have some new definitions up here on the board. So in general, elasticity is just a measure of how responsive our buyers or sellers are to some change in price, or as we'll discuss later on, in income. But first off, we're just going to focus on changes in price and how these impact our buyers and sellers. So when we say that we have something that's highly elastic, we're talking about a very responsive buyer or seller. So when they see a change in price, there's going to be a very large change in quantity demanded or quantity supplied. On the other hand, when we say something is not very elastic, or we say that it's inelastic, we mean that this buyer or seller is not very responsive. When there's a change in price, we see very little change in the behavior of our buyers and sellers. Now we're going to move on and we're going to discuss a very specific type of elasticity, and that is going to be the price elasticity of demand. So we're going to focus on how sensitive our buyers are to changes in the price of a good. Alright, so now we're going to talk about price elasticity of demand. And so when we think of the word elasticity, you might think of like a rubber band. So we're trying to measure how elastic, how stretchy, how malleable our consumers' demand is in response to a change in price. So price elasticity of demand is measuring how much the quantity demanded of a good is going to change when the price of that good changes. When we say that a good has elastic demand, this means that the quantity demanded for this good is going to respond very significantly to a price change. So if the price were to go up by 10%, maybe quantity demanded falls by 50%. We're having a very strong change in quantity demanded in response to that price change. Now on the other hand, if we say that a good has inelastic demand, what we mean is that the quantity demanded responds very little to a change in price. So we can imagine that the price of a good goes up by, say, 10%, and quantity demanded only falls by 1%. So for that change in price, there's a very small change in quantity demanded. It's not very stretchy, not very elastic. So how do we know if a good has elastic demand or inelastic demand? There's actually a list of 5 factors that we're going to cover, and you'll see that some of them are pretty intuitive, that we can use to help us determine whether a specific good is going to exhibit more elastic demand, stronger responses to price changes, or more inelastic demand, whether consumers are going to buy that product no matter what the price is. So now we're ready to talk about the 5 factors that can influence the price elasticity of demand. So when we're trying to figure out for a specific good whether the demand is elastic or inelastic, we want to think about these 5 factors in order to make our decision. So the first and the most important factor is the existence of substitutes. So when substitutes are very plentiful, this gives consumers more choice in the face of the price increase for a specific good. So let's imagine the market for orange juice, for example. So there are so many different brands of orange juice available, right? So whether you're buying Minute Maid or Florida's Own or Simply Orange, there are so many different choices for orange juice brands that if the price of one brand goes up, you'll be able to switch to buy another orange juice brand in that case. So if Simply raises the price of their orange juice by 50%, consumers will be able to go and buy a different brand of orange juice that hasn't raised their price. So when there's a lot of substitutes, we expect the demand for that specific good to be very elastic. When we see an increase in the price, we expect to see a significant drop in the quantity demanded for that good. When a good has many close substitutes, we expect the demand for that good to be elastic. Demand will be very responsive to a change in price. On the other hand, when a good has very few close substitutes, when there's nothing else like it out on the market, a change in the price is not going to have a very strong effect on the quantity demanded. So when there's no close substitutes, demand for a good is going to be very inelastic. Next, we're going to talk about necessities versus luxuries. So when something is a necessity, it's something that you can't live without, right? So for a necessity, we imagine that even if there's a price increase, you need to buy it anyways because you can't live without it. So we expect that demand for necessity goods will be very inelastic. Even in the face of a price change, you're still going to have to buy that good. So I don't know if you guys have seen this meme online. I'll try and insert a picture of it here. But this is a great example of elasticity in our daily lives, right? So if you drive a car, then gasoline is an absolute necessity, right? So it doesn't matter what the price of gasoline is, you're going to have to buy it anyways. So that's inelastic demand for a necessity good. On the other hand, if we consider a good to be somewhat of a luxury, it's an item that makes your life better, but it's not absolutely necessary, we expect demand for that good to be much more elastic or much more responsive to a change in price. So if the price increases for a luxury good, maybe like a candy bar or a nice steak or some video games, we expect to see a significant drop in quantity demanded in response to that price change. Now let's talk about the share of the budget that's spent on a good. This is another factor that affects our price elasticity of demand. So the basic idea here is that the more expensive a good is, the more elastic your demand will be. On the other hand, the more inexpensive a good is, the more inelastic your demand will be. So let's start with an inexpensive example. So I love to drink the fruit-flavored Red Bull, and so they have a bunch of different flavors, but let's say that right now a can of Red Bull costs $3. So this is a very small portion of my monthly budget, right? So even if the price of Red Bull went up from $3 to $4, the impact of this price increase on my budget is going to be pretty small. So because of this, when I see this price increase, it's not going to strongly deter me from buying Red Bull. So my quantity demanded of Red Bull is not going to change very much in response to this price increase. So I would say that my demand for Red Bull is relatively inelastic, and that's because I'm spending such a small portion of my budget on this good. On the other hand, if I was buying something much more expensive, like maybe a brand new TV, my demand for that good is going to be much more elastic or much more sensitive to a change in price. And this is because when I'm spending a large portion of my budget on a good, a discount or a price increase is going to be a pretty significant amount of money. So if I was going to buy a $500 TV and the price went up by 10%, that's going to be another $50 that I have to spend. So that price increase is going to matter a lot more to me. So when you're buying something where you're spending a larger portion of your budget on that good, you're going to be more sensitive to price changes, and you might be incentivized to try and shop around and find the best deal that you can. Next, we're going to talk about how we define our market and how this can impact our understanding of whether demand is elastic or inelastic. So let's talk about toothpaste. If we want to broadly define the market for toothpaste, we would just consider demand for all toothpaste products. However, if we want to define our toothpaste market more narrowly, maybe we'd pick a specific toothpaste brand. When we define the market for toothpaste very broadly, and we just consider demand for toothpaste in general, demand is going to be very inelastic. Toothpaste is probably something that you don't want to live without, so even if the price of toothpaste goes up, you're still going to buy it anyways. So your quantity demanded for toothpaste is not going to change very much, even if the price increases. On the other hand, if we define our market more narrowly, and we say that we're just looking at a specific toothpaste brand, like Colgate, if the price of Colgate goes up, you could just buy toothpaste from another brand, right? So in this case, demand for a specific brand of toothpaste is going to be much more elastic, much more responsive to a change in price. Consumers will just switch over to buy some other brand if the price of a specific brand were to increase. All right, lastly, we're going to talk about the time horizon that consumers face when making decisions as a determinant of their price elasticity of demand. So basically, the more time that consumers have to make a decision, the better they will be able to find substitutes for goods that are experiencing price increases. So we're going to break up this idea of the time horizon into 3 periods. The immediate run, where consumers are not able to change their behavior at all, demand will be very inelastic. Then we have the short run, where consumers can partially adjust their behavior. They have a little bit of time to alter their decisions, so demand will be somewhat elastic. And then lastly, the long run, where consumers can fully adjust their behavior and move to a substitute if they face a price increase. So in the long run, demand is going to be very elastic. So the example I like to use for this is going to go back to gasoline. So if you drive a gas car, you need gasoline in order to drive. And in the very immediate run, if you need gasoline, you don't have any time to adjust your behavior, right? If you're in your car and you're driving and your car's on E and you need gas, you have to buy gas right away. So demand for gasoline is going to be very inelastic in the immediate run when you're running out of gas. You don't have time to drive around and find the cheapest gas station. You just have to go to the one that's closest to you. So it doesn't really matter what the price of gas is, you're going to have to buy it anyways. Demand is very inelastic. All right, now in the short run, you have the time to partially adjust your behavior. So let's say that you're driving around and you notice that your tank is half full. So you know that you're going to need to get gas soon, but you don't have to get gas right now, right? So in this situation, you have time, maybe a couple days, and you can drive around or look on your phone and find the cheapest gas station near you, and you can choose to buy gas at that gas station. So in the short run, when you have a little bit more time to adjust your behavior, you're going to be more sensitive to price. You're going to have time to shop around and look for the best deal on gasoline. All right, and lastly, in the long run, maybe a period of a couple years, you as the consumer can fully adjust your behavior. So let's say that the price of gas is going up. In the very long run, you could say, forget it. I'm done buying gas entirely. I'm going to switch to an electric car. So in this case, demand is very elastic. In response to that price increase, you decide to completely stop buying gasoline, quantity demanded falls to 0, and you switch to an electric vehicle. So essentially, over time, as consumers have more time to make choices, they have better access to substitutes for the good that is experiencing a price increase, and demand becomes more elastic. Each of the 5 factors that we discussed provide us with some intuition to determine whether a good has elastic demand or inelastic demand, but what we're going to see now is that we can actually use a formula to calculate the price elasticity of demand for a specific good. Now let's do some practice calculating the price elasticity of demand. So our basic formula for calculating the price elasticity of demand is shown right here. So this E sub D is our math shorthand for the price elasticity of demand. And we're going to calculate this price elasticity of demand by taking our percentage change in the quantity demanded and dividing it by our percentage change in the price for a good. So let's do a quick example here. So this problem says university parking pass prices increased by 50%, and as a result, 25% fewer parking passes are purchased. So when we read this word problem, we have to decide and sort this information. So our change in price is a 50% increase, and our change in quantity demanded is a 25% decrease. So all we're going to do is plug this information into our formula. So I'm going to say my price elasticity of demand for parking passes is going to be equal to a 25% decrease in quantity demanded, since 25% fewer passes were purchased, divided by a 50% increase in the price. So what we want to notice here is that I need to make sure I include a negative sign for my change in quantity demanded. Because this problem is telling me that 25% fewer passes were purchased, this represents a negative change in quantity demanded. So I need to make sure that I reflect that in my calculations. All right, so I have negative 25% divided by 50%. My percent symbols are going to cancel out because I have one on the top and one on the bottom. And so my answer is going to be negative 1/2 or negative 0.5. All right, so what I've calculated here is that my price elasticity of demand is negative 0.5 for these parking passes. Now, what does this mean? How do I interpret this answer? So we're going to talk a little bit about whether this means our demand for parking passes is elastic or inelastic. But first, I just want to talk about how we can interpret this number. So what this number is telling us is that for a 1% increase in the price of a parking pass, we're seeing a 0.5% decrease in the quantity of parking passes demanded. Okay, so the way we interpret our price elasticity of demand for parking passes is that for a 1% increase in the price of a parking pass, the quantity of parking passes demanded is going to fall by 0.5%. And so we can see that that's what happened in our problem, right? The price went up by 50% and the quantity demanded fell by half of that amount. So does this mean that our demand for parking passes is elastic or inelastic? Well, what we're seeing here is that for a 1% increase in the price, quantity demanded is falling by less than 1%. So this change in quantity demanded is relatively small compared to the change in price. So does this mean that our demand for parking passes is elastic or inelastic? Well, what we're seeing here is that for a 1% increase in the price of a parking pass, the quantity of parking passes demanded is falling by less than that 1%. So what this tells us is that the demand for parking passes is changing relatively little compared to the change in price. And so in this case, what we'll see is that our demand for parking passes is inelastic. But we actually have a mathematical definition that we can use to just confirm this answer. So in this class, we will say that demand is elastic when the absolute value of our price elasticity of demand is greater than 1, and we will say that demand for a good is inelastic when our absolute value of our price elasticity of demand is less than 1. So now let's show exactly what I mean using the number that we calculated. So our price elasticity of demand for parking passes was negative 0.5. That was our answer. So in order for us to determine, using these conditions, whether demand for parking passes is elastic or inelastic, I need to take the absolute value of my price elasticity of demand. So what this means is I just want to get rid of the negative sign on my answer. So for me to find the absolute value of this number, I'm just going to make it positive. So my absolute value of my price elasticity of demand is just 0.5. And so 0.5 is less than 1, and therefore I would say that my demand for parking passes is inelastic. For a change in the price, quantity demanded responds relatively weakly. A question that you might have at this point is, why is the price elasticity of demand negative? The reason for this has to go back to the law of demand. So remember that the law of demand says there's a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So when price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. When price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. And so what that means is that whenever we're calculating our price elasticity of demand, we're always going to have a negative sign in either the numerator or the denominator. So our price elasticity of demand will always be negative. Then, when we want to find out whether demand is elastic or inelastic, we just turn that answer into a positive number and use our conditions up here to make that decision. We started out calculating our price elasticity of demand using this simple formula up here, where we divided our percent change in quantity demanded by our percent change in price. But the truth is that this formula will give us slightly different answers depending on whether we're talking about a price increase or a price decrease, even if we're using the same numbers. So the way that we get around this so that we can get a uniform answer every time, no matter the direction of the change, is by using this slightly more complicated formula called the midpoint method. So we're still doing the same thing here. We're going to calculate our price elasticity of demand, but we're going to calculate the change in our quantity demanded and the change in our price using the midpoint of the change, or the average of the change. So all we're doing here is we're going to take our change in quantity and then divide it by the average quantity, and then we're going to take that and we're going to divide it by the change in price divided by the average price. So if you want to see some more examples of this or a color-coded breakdown of the formula, please take a look at the lecture slides posted for this chapter. All right, now let's do an example with the midpoint method. I've rewritten our midpoint method formula here for our reference, and our example problem says, suppose the price of bread falls from $6 to $4. As a result, the quantity of bread demanded rises from 15 loaves to 25 loaves. And what we want to do is we want to calculate the price elasticity of demand using this information. So first, I want to identify where these numbers need to be plugged into my formula. So I want to figure out what is my new price, what is my old price, what is my new quantity demanded, what is my old quantity demanded. So in my formula, P1 is going to represent the original price, and P2 is going to represent the new price after the change. So in this problem, the price of bread has fallen from $6 to $4. So what this tells me is that we started at a price of $6 and then we ended up at a price of $4. So $6 is going to be my old price, or my P1, and $4 is going to be my new price, or my P2. All right, now Q1 will be my original quantity demanded, and Q2 will be my new quantity demanded. So this problem is telling me that the quantity of bread demanded rose from 15 loaves to 25 loaves. So Q1 will be my original quantity demanded of 15, and Q2 will be my new quantity demanded of 25. Now, just to check that I've put my numbers in the correct place before I even get started with my formula, I know that if price goes up, quantity demanded should go down. If price goes down, quantity demanded should go up. So from P1 to P2, my price has fallen. So I'm looking and checking my problem. That's correct. Price has gone down. So if price has gone down, quantity demanded should go up. So price went down from 6 to 4. Quantity demanded went up from 15 to 25. So it looks like my numbers are properly identified. Now I'm ready to plug them into the formula and calculate my price elasticity of demand. So to do this, the name of the game here is PEMDAS, or the order of operations. We want to make sure that we're doing things step by step in the correct order so we can get the right answer. So first, I'm just going to write everything out and plug everything in. So on the top of my fraction, or in the numerator, I'm going to do Q2 minus Q1. So Q2 is 25 minus Q1, which is 15. Then I'll close my parentheses. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to divide it by the average quantity. So when I add these two numbers together and divide them by 2, it's just giving me the average. So I'll set that up right here. So now I have Q1, 15, plus Q2, divided by 2. Ooh, that looks like I'm missing a parenthesis right here. There we go. All right, so that's it to set up my numerator. Now let's set up my denominator. So I'm going to do P2 minus P1. So that's going to be $4 minus $6. And then I'm going to divide that by the average price. So then I have P1 plus P2 divided by 2. All right, so now I want to do this step by step, and I want to do the inner parentheses before I do the outer parentheses. So my first step here, I'm going to erase this to give us a little bit more space, is I'm going to work on my inner parentheses. So first I can do 25 minus 15. 25 minus 15 should be 10. Then I want to do 15 plus 25 and divide that by 2. So 15 plus 25 is going to be 40. 40 divided by 2 will be 20. And so please use a calculator for these steps. It'll just make it easier for you. All right, now I'm moving on to my denominator. So I want to do $4 minus $6. And I want to be careful here that I'm using a negative sign. So 4 minus 6 is negative 2. Now I'm going to do what's in my inner parentheses. That's 6 plus 4, and then divide that by 2. So 6 plus 4 is 10. Divided by 2 is going to be 5. All right, so now I have a fraction on the top and a fraction on the bottom. So now I want to simplify this even further. So 10 divided by 20 is going to be 1 over 2. So what I have in the top here is 1/2. And now on the bottom, I have negative 2 over 5. I'm just going to leave that this way and plug it into my calculator. So now in my calculator, I can do 1/2 divided by 2 over 5. And what I will get is negative 1.25. So what this means is that for my bread problem, my price elasticity of demand for bread is negative 1.25. Now my last step here is, what if I'm asked, all right, based on this information, is demand for bread elastic or inelastic? What I want to do here is find the absolute value of my answer and then determine whether my demand for bread is elastic or inelastic. So the absolute value of my price elasticity of demand is going to be the absolute value of negative 1.25, which is positive 1.25. And so clearly, positive 1.25 is bigger than 1, so I would say that my demand for bread is elastic. It's relatively responsive to changes in price.